Welcome, everyone. My name is Jonathan Kane. I'm a systems engineer at FileWave, and been with FileWave for a couple years now. And my role is I work with customers and people that are looking to become customers on getting them set up and running on FileWave. I generally cover the Northeast, so I recognize a few of you here. But that's a little bit of my background there. Today's title is Fun with User-Approved MDM Enrollment and Privacy Preferences, Policy Controls in Mojave. I'm probably going to abbreviate that and call it just Privacy Profiles. There's a couple points in here because I get tired of all those words, but those are the official names here. Just as a quick feel for here, how many people, I'm assuming, are using an MDM right now to manage their machines? So pretty much everyone here. And how many people are deploying 1013 or 1014? Okay, so most of you have probably, most of you guys have here. There's all sorts of things that have been popping up in a good way as Apple's have been securing the operating system, and Apple's added, a couple ways to help manage that better through the use of those profiles. But I want to start off kind of just giving you a very quick overview about FileWave here. We've been around since 1992. And we specialize in the cross-platform client management, which includes MDM now. Again, we've been doing that for a while here, and basically we kind of do everything through the whole life cycle of the deployment process here. Just to quickly talk about, we basically have a FileWave server, we have an admin, we have a client, and we also have boosters which let us cache content around your setup. So if you're over multiple buildings, multiple campuses, et cetera, we have the ability to cache content as you're deploying your software. We were fully featured MDM, but we also have an agent that runs that lets you push out packages, MSIs, and individual files as well. So it makes us really unique because we can push, I want a set of files on these machines. I want them here now, and I want to make sure that they're there, they stay there, and they're not removed or changed. We can do traditional package rollout as well as MSIs there. And we do have some other components as well. We do have an imaging component that's mostly on the Windows side, obviously, but that's a piece that we still maintain as well. Short version, we support pretty much everything from 10.8 and above. You're going to tend to use legacy or some of our legacy clients for that, which you have a lot of the functionality, but primarily if you're staying current, everything will be pretty much 10, 11 and above, everything's 64-bit. And I just lost my mic. Sorry. We have mobile clients, obviously, iOS 8 and up, and Chrome support. We've also recently added some Android support for the EMM Android Enterprise Management Platform. And that lets us have the ability to actually do pushing out Google Play apps as well as profiles. So very, very quickly here, we run on pretty much all the platforms on the server side as well as hosting it out in the cloud. And what I mentioned is we handle, like I mentioned earlier, we cover all the different types of file sets, patches, updates, things like that. So we've been pretty busy since the last Macadmins. Right now we're at version 13.1. And since last year, we've really added a lot of additional security to the product throughout using your SSL cert for your server. So it's really nice, just knowing you have that comfort level there. We're beginning to use client certificates as well to just add another layer of security there. For those that are playing and attended our session last year on the RESTful API, there is a new thing that we do now is that each administrator can have their own tokens. So if you are playing around with the API, you have the ability to now to kind of set up a separate user just for that. That will be you can restrict what it has access to, or just have a separate one set up so you're not giving away the keys to the kingdom for everything. Again, we also added support for Android Enterprise Management, which I mentioned already. We are always keeping up with Apple, so they're pretty good at releasing a couple updates a year, so we make sure we're on top of that. Next one sounds like a small thing, but a lot of people are excited about it, is when you're doing DEP now with FileWave, you can actually kind of set up essentially smart groups where rather than having to assign your devices specifically to a DEP profile, you can now kind of have it follow a rule saying all machines that are iPads that start, with a serial number C or whatever. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but you can feed things right in without having to do that by hand. So that was a feature that people had asked for. And for people that are really diving in, there's a really neat feature now that we can anything that's in our inventory. So there's all sorts of variables in our inventory database. Anything that's a variable now can be used in scripts or in profiles by using like basically parameterized profiles. So you can get very creative now. That includes custom fields, which you've always been able to do, but you also can do that with scripts that you might write, or even with the DEP naming. So it's very that's kind of exciting for those people that are doing a lot of scripting with us. So to the main topic at hand here. So SIP. Everyone familiar with what SIP is on the Mac side, if you've been doing things for the past couple of years. It's been protecting us since System 10.11 and kind of growing over time into different parts of the operating system. So it was first introduced in 10.11, and back then I think it was just like, certain files you can't change, you can't write to certain folders, and 10.12 came along, they added a little bit more. With 10.13.2. They introduced the concept of user-approved MDM enrollment. Are people familiar with what that is? Okay, I'll talk about it a little bit. So initially, it just applied to one thing, which was like whitelisting of kernel extensions. So if you were installing something like a VMware or Sophos or anything that used a kernel extension, you see a message suddenly that comes up. Says, VMware is trying to install XYZ. You need to go to the security panel to say yes, it's okay, and you authorize it, and then it would add it in, and everything would be good. If you ignored that message, VMware wouldn't be all set up because it's missing those kernel extensions. So at first, like I said, oh great, I'll just remote in and help the user do that. Well, the problem is if you try to remote in, Apple's very clever. It actually realizes that no, you can't. You're not physically at the machine with a keyboard, so you can't actually hit that button that says make it user approved. So everyone's like, we're going to talk about in a minute how you can get around that, but you either have to have the user approve it by hand, or you want to be going through the device enrollment program. You have to be using the DEP as the option. So the solution that Apple had is, okay, you can push out a profile, and this profile can be a whitelist of what kernel extensions are allowed. So with that 10.13.2, they added a profile where you can say whitelist the VMware, whitelist this one, whitelist that one, etc. You can also let users approve. You can also give the users the right to approve that as well. But the key thing is, by default, you want to push out that policy if you know what you're deploying. And this was true even if FileWave or anything else was pushing out the software. It would still be trying to. You still would need that permission, that whitelist, to do that. What happened, so that was basically 10.13. It didn't affect a lot of people because maybe a lot of people didn't have an issue with that. 10.14 came out, and with what I'm going to nickname the privacy profiles here is, you'll notice with 10.14 you get asked a lot more times, hey, would you like to allow such and such to access such and such? And it asks a lot. Now, you could just leave it as it is and let the users decide, yeah, I'm going to not allow this, I'm not going to allow that. But there's many times where you actually specifically want to have the ability to maybe have certain behavior. If a user walks away from the machine or never answers the question, that's considered a denial. And if that's an important piece to make the software you're deploying actually function, you're going to have a problem. So they added these privacy profiles, but one of the pieces that they added in there, that they now have like protected areas like photos, library, and I'm going to show you a list in a minute. But another thing is, like, for instance, if you go into terminal, you can't navigate to certain parts of the hard drive, even if you go on as root, or even if you sudo to root. So you need to have an ability to be able to make exceptions to that, and that's where these PPPCP or these privacy profiles come in. And I'll just say, if you're probably attending the Apple sessions or just following WWDC, there are going to be more of them in the future as well. So this is not something that's it's not going to go away anytime soon. So back to user-approved MDM. stands for, so this is like the acronym that you hear, but it basically is standing for User Authenticated MDM. And where you see it is if you enroll a device, let's say you're doing it by hand, it says, you're now enrolled, but you want to make it user approved. There's a little button that says user must approve, and then you hit that button. So I'm just quoting Apple here. The UAMDM grants mobile device management software additional privileges beyond what is allowed for Mac OS enrollments that have not been user approved. So kind of like supervision, not quite, but there are certain features that are only going to be available if it has been user approved. If you want to add a kernel extension, again, that's, the MDM can whitelist it, but either you have to administrator has to manually approve it, or we can push out a policy to do that. It absolutely requires MDM to push out, so you can't just say here's a profile that's and then if you're going to push out these privacy profiles, it has to be over MDM. So what you basically do is push out a policy to approve those kernel extensions. Now, when is it turned on? If you run through the DEP process, by its very nature, at the end of that process, it's going to be automatically, when you've enrolled into FileWave or your MDM, it's going to say, yes, you are you're running user-approved MDM, and yes, you can push out a whitelist or privacy policy. If you're enrolling by hand and you don't approve it, it's not going to let you do those extra policies, and that approval does have to be hit. So the short version is basically you want to be using DEP if you can. If not, you have to make sure somehow that profile is authorized. Now, you used to be able to push out a profile command to enroll yourself in the MDM. If you try that with 10.13 or 10.14, it's going to have a little trouble with that. It's actually still going to need that user approval. If you can, you really want to be able to get to that the workflow where you can run devices through the device enrollment program. Things are grandfathered in. Devices that were upgraded, they were already enrolled in the M before upgrading. They are grandfathered in and considered user approved already. So an example of a kernel extension whitelist. So I'm going to show you a screenshot on how we do it in FileWave, but essentially, there are times when you want to, you may want to allow the end user to approve the extensions. You totally trust your users, no problem with it. You're going to let them hit OK, and they can do that. That's an option if that fits your organization. But remember, you have to be physically present at the keyboard to do it. It will not work remotely, so someone has to be there to do it. You can also specifically tell it, when you are whitelisting it, you have two ways of doing it. You can go by the team identifier, and what the team identifier is every developer that registers with Apple, in theory, has a team ID, and you can say, well, any kernel extensions from this particular team ID, we're going to allow those. So you're essentially whitelisting and saying, yep, I'm going to let you go through. You can get more specific and on the bottom part of the field and give it the team identifier in the actual extension itself. So maybe you want to only approve these 3 of the 5 that are from that particular developer. And we're going to go through a couple screenshots of how you get that information. But essentially, we have a GUI where you can just plug that piece of information in. So as an example, I was looking at a VMware extension because it has a couple that go in there. And that's the team ID, is that EG7K, et cetera, et cetera. We can also, like I mentioned, go by the actual extension, and what I have below is that same number is the team identifier, and then the com.vmware kex.vmio plug 18.1.2, et cetera. That is the actual, the extension name. So I can go either way when I create this profile, and that would only allow that specific extension from VMware. The whole idea is it doesn't have to be on the machine yet. So if we're telling it ahead of time, hey, if this extension comes your way, yes, it's okay. You can install it. There are some older extensions. I was looking on my laptop here, and I had a lot of old stuff that didn't even have team identifiers on it. If that's the case, I probably should be getting rid of those extensions. But that being said, if you don't have the information, you can actually leave that field blank and only add the extension, and that will work as well. But then again, you probably want to look at what you have if it is getting that old. So what it looks like in FileWave. Yep. Go ahead. Question. Oh, I get to throw the thing. Hold on. Oh, they hit it on me. Please throw it to him. Thank you.
Is this on?
Yep, we're good.
You said in FileWave you can just add the extension. Is that just in FileWave?
You could create a profile separately and import it into FileWave, but we have a pretty nice.
Well, I mean, if we're not using FileWave,
if you're not using FileWave,
do you know if other MDMs do the same thing?
I do not have enough familiarity. I know some do and some don't. Dave, do you happen to know? I don't want to speak for other products, really. I don't know what they.
Okay. All right, thanks.
I would imagine that most products have a way of getting a profile in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of them have a way of getting it in. Some have other tools that you create it in that tool and then bring it in. But yeah, I wouldn't know specifically about other ones. What we have here basically is we added it to our general profile editor. So if you are editing profiles here, you can see, I don't know if the type should be big enough that you can see, but on the top, we have a checkbox there. That says only allow user-approved enrolled devices to be managed with this payload. Can approve, so that this would allow the user to approve additional kernel extensions if we check that box. The next section says what are the allowed team identifiers. That's that team number that we got from VMware. And again, I'm going to show you how we get that, if because you don't know everyone's IDs, so this is how we look it up. And then the bottom part says allow kernel extensions, which is where I'm giving the identifier and the extension. So this was just a sample of what the screenshot would look like, if you were to be adding this into our whitelist. So how do you get this information? And this will be true of whatever you're using. So first of all, you probably want to test it on a machine. So you can take your VM or whatever you're doing. And you probably would install the piece of software to see what the heck's going on with it. And you will be prompted, hey, do you want to install this kernel extension? So that's like, oh, wait a minute, that's probably going to be an issue. Once it's installed, so you do it manually, you allow it to install. Once it's installed, the information is going to be in an SQL database. And these slides will all get posted, so we'll, at the end of the conference here. But essentially, there's a database at that VARDB system policy configuration text policy. And essentially, you launch SQL Lite, the SQL Lite 3 to that particular little database, and you can do a query which gives you the values that we need for the profile, which should be here. So I did this on a relatively clean machine, but what you can see is when I ran that command, you can see I went into the database first and then basically did a dump of the table there. You're seeing the team identifier first, followed by the extension name, followed by the vendor. That's where I gathered that information for the whitelist. So that's basically the pieces I need. And as an example, you can see VirtualBox did something, and on this particular machine, I also had looks like I have an HP printer driver that's on there as well. So I'm going to do a quick demo of the kernel extension, just so you can see what it looks like here. And what I did is I spun up a VM. And first thing first, if you look, I'll make this a little bigger so you can actually see what we're doing here. Okay. So what I did here first was, you can see these are the list of the kernel extensions that I currently have here. I'm going to install Sophos Home because I knew I was trying to find something yesterday that was actually going to try to put an extension on me here. You can see it's not in here. Now we are going to see it prompt for privacy stuff, which that's like the second part of the talk. But we're going to just ignore that. What we're looking now is to see. You're going to have to trust me when I ran this when I ran it before without any policies on here. It said, I'm trying to install the extension. You need to go and approve it. Okay, but I don't want to install it and uninstall it twice here. So, so what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up the file. If there's a question over here, if someone could throw the. This way they can record the questions for the tape.
Is there an easy way to figure out which kernel extensions are apples and should not be touched? And because in the folder,
there are some commands that let you search for kernel extensions, and you can kind of figure out. You can tell by their location sometimes. I mean, the Apple ones would have the vendor name on them, but that's not always the case. I don't think there's a harm in whitelisting an Apple one, which is probably they've already whitelisted it or essentially themselves. But it's generally be the third parties that get you. So, like, I would probably do it on a clean machine, and then only you'd know pretty much right away because it's something just triggered. Oh, I did VMware, so you're going to look for VMware in that list. And they're generally the names are generally in English, but like sometimes, like the developer name doesn't match or something. You know, it depends. Like the guy that signed up for it somewhere, you know, put their own name in or something. But it's a little detective work, but it's not that. I don't think there's any harm if you had to do an additional whitelist that you don't necessarily need. So right now I have this machine that's in as a VM, and if I go to the machine, we can see, let me just go to the associations here. So this is the FileWave admin here. I set up a bunch of profiles for the demo today, and the one I'm interested in is the Sophos Home kernel whitelist. Okay, so if we click on it here, I'm going to edit the payload, and I only have one policy going out on the machine that's just for that thing. And if I bring up the kernel extension here, in this case, I went with just put the team identifier in for the Sophos Home. Okay, so this is not being applied right now. If I look at the machine itself, and I go back to here, and we look at our profiles, we should be pretty empty. Profiles here. So all I have is my MDM enrollment here, and let me just make sure we don't have it in there. Okay. Make sure we don't have I'm actually make sure I'm going to remove it so we make sure. So what I did is I actually added it. I added it earlier to make sure I was all set with it. So I have the profile active now. So what I was going to show you is I'm going to assign it and make it show up, but it's already there, so you don't have to do that. Okay, so what I want to show you basically is if I go to install the Sophos Home, now I have a policy there. I have it set here, and I can see that it made it there. I know that the profile is there. So what I'm going to do now is go launch the Sophos Home, which I believe I put on my desktop. Make a new window here, desktop. Okay, Sophos install, okay. Blah, 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 I agree, okay. Alrighty, so this is going to install, and at the very end, Sophos is actually pretty clever. It says, hey, by the way, you have to give the installer permission to do stuff to the privacy panels, which is the other whole topic, but it's actually nice. It actually tells you, like, hey, you're going to have a problem. What you're going to see, though, is it's never going to basically, and actually they tell you to go to here to protect the computer, add the installer, so the installer can do some of its other pieces. But what's going to never happen is it's never going to actually, you're going to see that it actually installed the extensions in here, which are these three down here. I'll go by modified date. It installed those three extensions into that folder, and they're active, and it didn't prompt me about that. Now, it would prompt me like if it wants to access the full hard drive and other stuff, but that's again, that's the other topic. But yeah, so that basically is how the kernel extensions work. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, not too bad. Question back there, if you could toss it to the third row, thanks. Yeah, throw it, man. Yeah.
I might be jumping the gun, but is it better to make one for each vendor or one for each, or is it better to create a combined, if you know you're going to have 5 different things on every machine, is it better to can you make one combined with 5 different approvals in the, rather than making one for Sophos and one for, say, Microsoft and one for Avast and one for, or can you just put Avast team identifier, KTEX, next in the same?
Yeah, I think you could, I mean, I like to do things in separate profiles just because it lets me be more modular. Nothing's stopping you from adding multiple information in there. One reason I might try to make it more modular, at least with FileWave, I can create all sorts of smart groups, like detect the presence of a well, the whitelist you'd want the whitelist there before, but like I know this group of machines is going to get the software, assign the profile, and then like, have the software, make sure that, and then have a smart group that says if the profile's there, then yeah, you go ahead and do the yeah. So that could be more modular, but I mean, you could certainly put all of yours into one kernel extension thing if you wanted to. So probably just, I mean, it's the same question as when you're doing profiles in general. Do you put everything in one, or there's a whole bunch of debate about that. I'm just going to uninstall the Sophos because I don't need that running in addition to everything else while we're doing this. While we're talking, so that's basically any other questions on the kernel whitelist, and then I'll hop back into the slides here. question in the second row. So throw the catch box. I'm the only one who doesn't get to throw it.
Could you just go over the where you got the team ID from again?
The T-val, yep, sure. Let me go back here. Just get rid of that for you there. Okay, all right. So the value for that team identifier, yeah. So let me go back into the slides because that's. So apologize on the size of it here, but there's a couple ways to do it. The easiest way is I did that SQLite command. So it's SQLite var/db/system policy configuration /kext policy. And you do need to have sudo. You have to be on as root or sudo to read that. And what that does is that dumps you into the SQL. And basically the command that we see there then is select star from kext policy with a semicolon at the end. That basically says show me all the fields from that table. And the first column of the table, it looks like there's 4 fields here. The first column is the team identifier. If you're writing your own software, you'll know what that is because you did it. But that's probably the easiest way to get it. There's probably a couple other ways to get it too, I'm guessing. But this seemed to be the, at least for me, the quickest way to do it. So.
Thank you.
And then I have some links at the end. I'll keep that slide up the longest. But there's some links at the end of like some sites. There's a lot of discussion on the web about this, and people have doing it different ways to grab, especially when you get to the privacy profiles. So now the fun part. So transparency, consent, and control in Mojave, or TCC for short. So apparently it's been around for quite some time, actually, kind of just sitting there. And it's kind of that thing where it says, you know, you want, anytime you used to ask for permissions of things, that's basically when it would, what it was handling. And generally, it didn't pop up a lot, but the user would say, yeah, yes, you can access my contacts. Okay, and then you're done with it, and you don't think about it again. With 10.14, Apple actually put out, they've been doing this the last couple operating system upgrades, is they've kind of been saying how to prepare your institution or your business for 10 whatever. And in there, with the Mojave one, they have a nice little discussion about privacy profiles. It even affected their products. So for instance, one of the profiles we're going to show you is the kickstart command, which is part of Apple Remote Desktop. And you want the ability with that to, for instance, a lot of people would script stuff to have ARD get configured and add a couple users and do a couple other things. It was a very, very handy command. Still is. But by default, it won't let you do control of the screen if you try to execute it. So there's a privacy profile that Apple put out, and they actually posted, which you can import directly into FileWave or whatever you're doing, which basically allows the kickstart to have that ability to do what it needs to do, to be able to turn it on and actually have it do those other features that you want. But essentially, they do talk about that in that tech article. The biggest change is that it cuts off certain, when you're like in things like terminal, like programs need full disk access. So a lot of backup programs, if you're using a Backblaze or something like that, it would say, hey, you have to add Backblaze to have access to the full hard drive because it can't access any user photos, any certain folders, library, Safari can't get to those unless you grant that access. So it's a piece that you kind of want to automate in some cases here. MDMs, and this is where MDMs are becoming more critical, they can manage these requests using these policy control payloads that Apple has developed for us. And just as a point, even if these protected areas, you can go on as root, and I'm going to show you in a minute, if you try to do a directory or do a listing, it just says not permitted, no matter what you do. So why would you want to override these things? Well, sometimes the user just ignores the message, right? Well, if it's trying to ask you, can I get permission to access the entire hard drive, and they just ignore it, well, and it's your backup software for the machine, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to have that permission. So you may want to push that out and say, yes, I trust the users, but I need to make sure this gets selected. When a user is away or they're just not at their desk or whatever, they just never answer it. That's considered a negative as well. Sometimes you have scripts that maybe need to access a protected area. You don't want it prompting the user to do that, so you may want to authorize that. And it just comes down to user experience in the end. Depends on your organization, but it's going to be something you're probably going to want to do, especially as they add more. But the nice thing is basically this is all be able to be controlled by these privacy preferences policy control panels, PPPCP. So what areas, now that we're talking about like, these payloads, what areas are protected? We keep on talking about these things are protected, you can't access them. So things that would trigger these alerts, an app wants to access your address book, wants to access your calendar, reminders, photos. In the case of cameras and microphones, it's more of a deny. You can only deny apps to those things. You're not granting access to them. So you may say, under no conditions do I want Safari ever to have access to the camera. You could deny that. So those two are a little different in that they're denials. The fun one is those ones I just mentioned are things that users would normally click and be like, yeah, okay, fine, great, I'm going to allow you to do that. The other one is that the second set here are more things that would be done at an administrative level. So your users may not be administrators, so even if they wanted to grant those privileges, they probably can't. What would those things include? If anyone's been running, like, have you guys on like a team viewer or anything like that, or any remote control software under 1014, it's interesting because I can observe the screen usually with a customer when I'm working with them, and then when we go to take remote control, they all of a sudden have to grant the permission, not the normal granting permission, but they have to go to their preferences and they have to allow, there's a couple extra steps there. Well, that's fun stuff. That's considered accessibility, okay? So that remote control, that remote, that type of stuff, that has to be granted, but that's something only an administrator can do. So if you push this out as a policy, sometimes the user may, if the user's not an administrator, they may not be able to grant you that permission as the user they are logged in on with the team viewer. So like, yeah, if you're using something like team viewer for support, you want to make sure that's in there. I'll partially think for some reason Apple actually added an MDM checkbox recently to turn on or allow Apple Remote Desktop, and my guess is probably for this very reason. Other things are like what they call post events, which are things like the kickstart command, and then there's a link to an Apple Tech article, but basically this payload can actually override that. The fun one that I deal with the most is the system policy all files and the system policy admins. I'm going to show you just as an example, because I'm not going to go through each one of these, but that's the one where you go to terminal and you can't navigate beyond, the area that it doesn't want you in. So the first thing I do is I take terminal, and if you were to do it manually, you take terminal and then you'd actually say, allow it access to all files, and then you'd have to, you authenticate, and then you're good. But you can do this automatically with a profile. And then you get into the last is anything that falls under automation as well. So that's a little more fun. So what happens is you basically come up with these profiles and say what's the program that's asking, and what type of access is it looking for, and you can grant those. So overall, they do line up for the most part with the policy profiles that you see already in the system control panel. When you as an end user without an MDM doing your own thing, you see these different categories about what location tracking and everything like that. There are categories for calendar and everything else. Those basically, these do pretty much mirror those, but there are a couple additional ones. And again, all of this is in the Apple configuration profile reference PDF that Apple has. So they get into very much detail what they are. But these these payloads, privacy payloads, I'll call them, they have to be delivered by an MDM. Okay, so you can't just like, oh, here's my profile to allow these. I'm going to double. It does have to have an MDM to do that. So that is something you need to consider if you're not running one now. They do show up. They do not show up in the GUI. So as far as if I go to the privacy control panels, the ones that the end users use, they will not see these policies. You would see them listed in the profiles, but you're not going to see them as policies in that control panel. Technically speaking, the actual policies are located in that link that I have down there in the application support folder. And again, that also is protected. So if terminal's not allowed to read that file, you actually have to let terminal see the whole hard drive before you can read the file. So Apple's really thought this thing through. And again, these are 1014 only. So be careful, because you don't want to push out these to a 1013 machine, because they get sent out, they'll get applied, nothing will, they won't know what to do with it. And then when you do upgrade to 1014, it's like, what profile? What are you talking about? So you could make a smart, and then this is where, like in FileWave, you could create, or rather, you could create a smart group of these profiles go to machines requiring it must be 1014 or above. So you want to make sure you're careful where you're sending those out. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the user-approved MDM, that needs to be approved for you to be pushing these out unless the user actually has done it themselves. Additionally, software in question, you need to, I'm getting mixed results with this, but I think the official word is basically, you need to have that app present on the machine before you grant the privileges for it. So if I'm pushing out TeamViewer and I want to add permissions to it, unlike the kernel whitelist, I want to make sure that the software is there, because when the profile is getting applied, it's needing to see that the software is on the machine already. So a best practice would be to make sure you have a smart group, that you know the software is on that machine. So in our case, you could do like an inventory check and make a smart group, and then make sure those people are assigned to that. Make sure that at that point you assign the profile to those particular people. So again, you want to, and I'm trying to make my chicken and egg thing joke there, but basically you need to have the software there before you actually try to apply the profile. Very long list here, but these are the protected areas that they talked about. What it comes down to in the end is basically every user folder, application support, pretty much like the address book, the privacy database, call history, this is calendars, messages, mail, Safari. So you kind of get why it might be important if you are backing up these machines, or you need access for scripts to do something in something as common as the mail folder or Safari folder. And this is why I'm going to show you, we can actually exempt the FileWave agent itself from these rules, because the rules apply to everything. I may want to deliver, with FileWave something to the Safari folder. I can't do that if it's, unless I make sure that my agent is allowed to write to that area. So this is at a very low level that Apple is protecting these folders. But essentially, you can see basically they're pretty much all user library related, and also a couple sensitive files like the DS local nodes and stuff like that. So, and they're telling us there's going to be more. So, the hardest part, honestly, is trying to figure out what it needs to do. Now, sometimes it's real simple. Again, VMs are great. So create a VM, install the software on there, and see what it's prompting you to do. That's going to be your easiest way to figure out, okay, what the heck is, like, what is even asking for, and what type of access is it looking for. But if it's not that clear, there are two commands here that look at the log, essentially. The first one basically kind of is in real time, and it's looking kind of for like the TCC commands to pop up. And I have a screenshot of it in a minute. It's a little crazy to look at, but it can kind of give you a hint of what what it is that you're trying to what's asking for approval. The second one is more of a, okay, I know whatever happened in the past, but I need to know show me the events that were prompted for and approved in the past. So, and again, these are two ways of doing it. There's a couple blogs out there. People are doing different ways of trying to capture this. The hardest piece is just figuring out what the app is asking for, what type of service. Some of it's obvious. Sometimes it's not as obvious. Hopefully most vendors of the software kind of know this is happening. And I've seen a couple software vendors saying, here's a profile to download to make our software work. If you have an MDM, click here. That would be the best solution. So what do the logs look like? Well, without any, so I'll hop into the demo in a second, but without any profiles installed at all, if you try to navigate to like users, administrators, library, Safari, it's going to say operation not permitted. And then you go on its root and it's like not permitted. It's like, what the heck? You say, I'll turn off SIP. No, it just will not see that. So, again, that command, I just took that from the previous line, but what I did here is I triggered it by not having any policy on there and telling it in terminal to navigate to like library Safari, user account library Safari. And when I did that, it flagged the terminal app, and you can see it's the full path, like the terminal app contents, terminal, etc. And it told me that it was not happy in that it was referring to something called libexec sandboxd, which English, what it turns out to mean is I need to add full disk access to terminal. So it's kind of an art to reading these, and I'm not even fully there yet with it, but there are a couple different people that have posted different approaches to try to track it down. Yep.
Thank you. So if you give terminal full access to the disk, does that mean anyone who uses terminal gets it? Can
Yeah.
you restrict that full access to just a specific user running
No,
terminal?
No, I don't think so, no.
No? Okay.
But you could, with your MDM, not let terminal launch by anyone other than a certain group of people, too. Yeah.
Well, yeah, some of our developers use terminal, but we want just our admins to have like everything. You know, they may use terminal for certain things, but not everything that we would want it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, like with your MDM, you can restrict where things can launch from, or you can get clever and change permissions on the terminal app itself and only let people in certain groups just at a POSIX level set. I mean, there's probably a couple ways you could. I would probably look at trying to restrict the terminal access itself. Because I used to I would have like the teachers, when I worked in a school system, the teachers would have access not to terminal. No matter what, a terminal might be authorized to do stuff, but they were not going to have access to even launch terminal from the Finder. So, yeah, that's it. But these are all granted at the when you're pushing these policies out, they're being granted at the system level, machine level. Yeah. Now, I think the calendar stuff, if the users are adding it themselves, that's per user. But these policies are
third-party terminal and just get a full box.
Yeah, so there's third-party terminal programs too, and then decide, only you push it out with your deployment system only to certain people, and do it that way too, or give them or you could set all the user accounts to go to a dev null shell or something, and then they don't go anywhere. So, I had a coworker or a friend in another district who did some really evil things to prevent terminal access for the kids, but another topic for another day. But yeah, so in English it's saying full disk access. Now, would you even need to deploy this as I do it because it really annoys me when I can't get to where I need to in terminal. In production, are you going to probably do that? Probably not. You would probably just add it. You could also just on that person's machine, you can certainly add the full disk access just in the GUI as as a user for the machine too. So that might be the easier way with them. I don't know if I push out like something like this to everyone, but I wanted an easy example. So examples of what they look like in FileWave here. So just a little heads up here. Generally speaking, there's several open source tools. So you asked, you have to edit in FileWave. No, you don't. There are many tools out there. I will mention one that's called PPPCP Profile. It was command line, and there is actually someone actually contributed a couple items to actually make it so you could actually launch it in a GUI as well. But basically, it brings up a nice little GUI with kind of like similar settings to what we have, where you can pick the app, and there's a thing called Codesign, which we'll talk about in a minute, and you can essentially generate a profile that comes out as a mobile config, which you can then import into your MDM. Okay, depending on your MDM, you may or may not be able to edit it once it's in there. There are some administrators that are beginning to put collections of these TCC profiles together, and the beauty of it is a TCC profile, like once you have mobile config, it's the same for whatever you're doing. So someone may be contributing it from one MDM and another. So as people are collecting these TCC profiles for common things like Microsoft Office with permissions and things like that, you certainly can. There's nothing specific, vendor specific to any of these profiles, so you can reuse. Some of the ones I brought in were just from the repository that was on that TCC profile GitHub site. That particular person also wrote a couple nice articles about stuff too. So we also have, like I mentioned, there's a Google Doc that someone put together. There's only maybe about 24 on there right now, but people are I guess people contributed that if they have, what's triggering what. Yeah. So in FileWave itself, we actually have an interface to create these profiles. It's built right into the GUI. You have a couple things you need to enter: the path to the app. The result of a Codesign command, which we're going to show you, no way around that, and what type of access you're giving the devices. Okay. Again, this only applies to 1014 machines. They won't apply to 1013, so you want to make sure you're careful about where you're putting these out. And I'm going to show you some sample profiles and how we generated the information. Oh, sorry, can you get a picture? Sorry. Okay. So, a couple examples. This one was taken from Apple, literally. So what you see here is, again, I imported this one pre-made from Apple. Left-hand side shows, I just want to show you before and after. You see on the top, it asks for the app path of the bundle ID. I've done things both ways. This is using the bundle ID, so it's com.apple.screensharing.agent, okay? And underneath that, what service am I allowing? I'm allowing them to post system events, which is what the policy was that the kickstart command pieces needed. What am I doing? I'm allowing access. I ran that Codesign command. It's a little dim there, but it says Codesign -- display -r my app. You can also do the same thing, just putting a, I think you put a single, there's a shorter command you can do that, but basically what you wind up with is a string, or either a short string or a long string. The result of this, this particular, when I applied it to the ARD, was what you see below there. It says identifier com.apple desktop agent and anchor apple, and I'll show you what others look like. And then I put a comment in there, this allows control mode with ARD when starting it with the kickstart command. Okay, so that's one example. Second one is so FileWave has a VNC process built in to our agent on the Mac and the Windows side. Now, that's great, it's awesome. You can remote control from anywhere, where we're, as long as both the admin and the client can see the server. Wherever they're at, it figures out all the translation and everything. The only problem is when it tries to launch under 10.14, it's trying to offer up remote control of the machine. And it's a little hard to have the user kind of, we don't have the user take care of that. So we posted in a knowledge base article, essentially we took it step by step, and it goes each step literally how to do everything. But what we did is we said, okay, we created a profile here. It's going to user local SBIN FileWave. That's our path to our VNC server. Okay. What access are we giving? We're giving it access to accessibility and the posting of system events. So our engineers figured out those were the two things that we needed to, allow, that need to be approved. I'm allowing access, and again, when I ran the code side command on that VNC server process, the result I got was the identifier that's there below. Okay. There is an option to statically validate the code requirement, which in our directions that was required for our setup. But this now, if I push it out as a profile, FileWave command line does the thing. I take remote control. User's not getting prompted, and that makes life a little less difficult for them. I can do the same thing with the FileWave agent. So we actually have a command line, our agent that runs in the background. This was a simple one. I could figure it out because I knew where the command line. I knew where our agent was. And I wanted it to have full access to the hard drive, because what does FileWave do? It delivers files to the entire hard drive. So we can deliver packages and then tell them to run. But the other thing we do is we deliver files to very specific locations. I may want to put an icon in every user's library in a certain location. Without me having this on here, the operating system will say, hey, you can't write there. It's not an area you're allowed to write to. So by me saying that the FileWave command line daemon can now connect to those locations, or can write to those locations, I can now deliver what I want to where I need to have it go. So that's a very handy thing as well. And again, I'm pushing it out with FileWave, so I'm just bootstrapping it out. And again, anytime you're dealing with an agent, you want to make sure that it's Siri. So that's an example here, and again, that was a result of the Codesign command, and I put a note here that it's for the FileWave command line. How do we put this all together? So what do we need, as I kind of showed you in those screenshots there? You need to know either the path to the application, the actual executable, or you need the bundle ID. Now, you can find the identifier or the bundle ID by going specifically, if it's an application package, you can go to My App, Contents, Info, Plist, and it will be in there under the CF bundle identifier. I actually spelled it right good. And you'll see the name there, and that's the actual, that's one way to do it. You can also find the path if you install this particular thing and you see that Mail is asking for access to a particular thing. What you can do is when you could do the manual approval in the GUI, and when you go look at the GUI and the security preferences, and you right click on it, you can say show in Finder. It'll actually bring you to that to the path. So if you want to go by the path, you would do it that way. Either piece of information can be used in the top there. You saw when I did the FileWave command line one, I actually did that by path. The other one, the remote desktop, I did by the bundle ID. But either way, no matter what I do, I still need to get that Codesign result. And the way you do that is you issue a command called Codesign -dr space dash, and then path to the actual app or to the executable, depending on what you determine. And what you get back is everything you see that after that equals great. I'll show you the result, but anything that's after the designated part is what you paste in. So and then you also, of course, need to know what services you're trying to activate. So I went with something really simple here. I said, give me give me this information on the Mail.app. And what you can see here is I issued the command, pointed it to the Mail.app, and what it returned to me was designated, so I ignore that part, identifier, quote, com.apple.mail, and anchor apple. This is going to be much longer if you're looking at other apps, depending how they've signed their apps, depending how they haven't signed their apps. It could be much longer, and it looks like gibberish, but you want to capture all that. So whatever that command puts out, you do want to capture. Everything after the thing that says designated, it starts with the word identifier. So you paste in identifier is the first word in there that you paste. Yeah, let me just be absolutely sure. Yep, it's everything after the word. It's starting with identifier to the end of whatever it does. And it could be quite long. Sometimes there's multiple lines depending on what app you're talking about. For some reason, Apple apps seem to be very much shorter. But like I've tried, and like ours was short, but then I went to another one. It gave me a much longer one. So it depends, I think, on the. I think it depends on how they're signing their stuff. So in summary, and then we're gonna do the demos in a minute, but in summary, as the macOS becomes more and more secure over time here, you just need to and much more aware of user privacy and how important that is. They've added profiles to make it easier for us to help manage that experience on devices that we're managing, which is why you have that whole user opting in piece. If it's an organizational piece of equipment, it's assumed, yes, you need to do these things. But if people are bringing their own devices, you want them at least to have the option to opt into these changes that you might be making to privacy. Kernel extensions are pretty straightforward. We can deliver them as a whitelist, essentially. We can allow the users to approve if we would like to. That's part of that policy. If we don't, then they can't at all. We can request that apps. For requests from apps that are looking for protected content, we can push these out as policies now. As you saw, there is some detective work to sometimes figure out exactly what's asking for what, but once you get through that piece, it's you can put together your profile. What it means basically is you don't have to depend on the users to grant these permissions, which sometimes they ignore. So you want to make sure that they. If they're not going to hit it, you want to make sure you take care of it so that if it's not interfering with something that you might be trying to do. In particular with FileWave, we do allow that editing in the GUI, which is nice. Again, you can import these profiles as well if you need to. And like I said earlier, you can really expect to have a lot more of these in the future. Now, I'm going to hop into the demo basically because we've run on the time here. But I want to kind of show you the terminal navigation and then maybe a couple quick policies. And I'm going to I can take a couple questions as you might if you want to take down some of these links. But places to check out, Macadmins Slack, there is a channel just for the TCC where that's all they talk about. I'm a little behind on my Slack, but it's got some good content in there. Richard's actually put together a collection of profiles as well. There's the Apple documentation for the configuration profile references, which I don't think there were many examples in there, but they kind of explain what each thing means essentially. There is the TCC profile tool that I mentioned earlier. So if your MDM doesn't support it or you have no way of editing it, it's a very handy way of kind of creating those. And if you launch it from the command line, I try to remember the exact flag, but there is a GUI now in there as well. We also have, if you want to see what's in that MDM overrides, you can read it with like plist buddy to see what the MDM is pushing out. And again, the last two are FileWave specific, but we did an article on the privacy payloads in 1014, exactly where to add them, et cetera. And in particular, for the observing policy, we have a recipe. That's the one essentially I showed you, but essentially it takes you step by step on how to create that. So any quick questions before I hop in the demos? I want to show you a couple of the, yep, in the back, if you could throw the.
Thank you. My question comes down to the bundle identifier versus the path. If you use a path, does that then scrape the bundle identifier? Because I'm just thinking of users who install apps in places that are, well, maybe standard for, I mean, user/application. Username/application is a perfectly valid place to put applications.
Yeah, people do that.
Yeah. So would
Unless you
best
go to-
practices be to use a bundle identifier in that case?
Well, the bundle identifier would never change, probably.
Right.
So that'd probably be the safest. But on the other hand, yeah. So the privacy ones, the privacy wouldn't change the code sign result. But the idea would be if you did it on you're saying software you don't know about, but they would you would want them to create a privacy profile there.
I'm just saying in the profile, instead of using the absolute path to the app, it seems to me that using the bundle identifier would be a better practice, because people relocate or drag to their desktop and launch the
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you on that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the policy is going to be
And have you seen much variability in the Codesign results from version to version of apps?
It's not supposed to change unless the developers change their certificates, which they could be known to do. But you can also, I believe, Dave can actually correct me if I'm wrong, but if things are not signed, there's a way to not have it. There's a way to ignore that or not have it check or something. Isn't there I think that's what that checkbox does on the bottom with the. Because the notes I was reading said, like, if a vendor changes their stuff behind the scenes, where was it here? I thought it was like
You're going to run into other problems.
yeah. Yeah, everyone should be signed, and especially notarized in the future too, and all that. So, yeah, we have fun times ahead. But we will be keeping up with that. So don't worry. Yeah, we're just talking about what's now today. So that session's probably that was yesterday's session, I think. Yeah, any other questions, or I'll kind of go through like just some of the examples I have here with in real time. So you good? Yeah, so I was going to show you real quick, basically, is I wanted to show you like a before and after on terminal. So we got our Sophos uninstalled here. Great. All right. So present working path is user administrator library. Oh, let's do great. Okay. Let's go into the Safari folder. Operation not permitted. Okay. So I have a pre-made policy here. Yeah, I think for the code sign, the path wouldn't matter because that's going to be the same. But you're right about the identifier. That could be a little messy depending on what they're doing. So let's just go to Filesets here, and I'm going to go to the full disk access for the terminal. So I made a TCC whitelist for terminal. This was actually one that I pulled in from one of the repositories, actually. Brought it in. Just show you the payload real quick. Yeah, because I don't name things my great company. The explanations, etc. I go to my payload here, com.apple.terminal. Okay. If I click on it, this particular person set it up with a lot of stuff. It's allowed to do Apple events, protected files, which means the whole hard drive speed, and allowed to take control, I guess, with accessibility. You can see that basically this is the identifier that was returned, etc. So I'm going to add this policy now by simply, I'll just do it the easy way here. I didn't make changes, thank you. I'm going to right click on it and say create association. I'm going to add it just to this one device because I don't need to change everyone here. Okay. This is my VM here. I'm going to add the whitelist, update the model so we commit our changes here. And if I go to VM here, okay. And what I'll do is bring up our kiosk. I'm just going to, rather than, well, it should go after the push command, but I'm very impatient. I don't like to wait. So when I hit the verify command, it just kind of speeds it up. Kind of says, hey, Apple, send it to me now. All right. And basically, as soon as my profile gets there, just got to wait a second. Let's check if it made it. Still working on it. All right. That's the worst part. You always have to, yeah. It's always faster when I'm not demoing it. Sorry. All right. It really will work. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna try that. Yeah. It's because it's demo time. I'm going to actually assign the others that I want to show you too, so I'm not doing that. So let's do the, I'm also going to show you a, the full disk for the, full disk for FileWave command line, and my other demo was the, okay, got it. So for instance, our tool that we use to capture the differential when we're doing a file set, a file level file set, we would add that, get full disk access as well, because by default, we used to just launch it, you could launch it as a root user. That's not enough now. So, you know, we, many tools are going to need to be adjusted, especially utility type tools. They're used to getting access to parts of the hard drive that, I'm going to turn on the FileWave Observe, and I'm also going to turn on the Apple one as well. Okay. Okay. And last but not least, yeah, as an example, though, someone created an Adobe Photoshop CC17, and they added all the policies they needed to get Photoshop to be able to have access to what it needed to. All right, so let me just do kickstart, and we're good. There we go. I think those profiles should be getting there by now. Okay.
With these, if a user
they do.
has made a choice before the profile is landed on the box, does this undo the user's choice? So if they've denied something and you specifically allow it, and then the profile hits the box, does it go flip their choice?
I don't know.
It seems to me like it should, but I wouldn't say for.
That's something we could certainly test. Yeah, I didn't try that scenario yet. But that's, yes. I mean, there are ways of resetting the TCC database. You could do through, you know, you could. Yeah, that's a good question though. Yeah. Well, for the user ones, maybe. I mean, but for those system level ones, they don't have the ability to do some of them, depending.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. This is why I do the screenshots, just in case connectivity is not. Let me just. All right, let me just do. Okay. The beginning coming. So I'm gonna show you these profiles, and then we'll show you what they look like on the other side here. So we talked about Kickstart already, and the FileWave Observe. These are the ones I had the screenshots for. Full disk access for the FileWave agent. I didn't show you that one yet, but basically, if you look at my payload here, in this case I gave it a path because I know very specifically what I wanted here, yep, did not finish it there, but I give it. I'm sorry about that. What I put in there is the full. The Codesign command gets pasted back in there, and you give it full access is what you need for that particular process. And then for the as an example, I also brought in a VMware one that someone had created. There's 3 extensions in that case, but I guess this was the, and we can see here too, is the team identifier was allowed here, so that basically says let all of the VMware stuff do its thing. This is handy because if you're pushing, say, VMware with FileWave, you could push it out and you can try to deliver it to the, it'll go to the kernel, it'll deliver it where you tell it to go to, but it's not gonna, if it's not whitelisted, it's gonna reject it. So, you know, so the chicken and the egg is you kind of have to have the software, it's gonna reject it when you try to launch it. So you get the software out there first and then you actually apply the whitelist. All right, I'm just gonna check one thing real quick here. All right. Oh, okay, now they all showed up for me. So they always are faster when you're not demoing. So.
Is that APNS?
Yes, it's APNS, and I'm guessing we just have a few Mac users on campus here this week. So, no, seriously, when I do these demos, it's usually within the 10, 15 seconds. You can literally see them showing. Now, what you can see here is the profiles that are arranged. Now, the big wow demo I wanted to show you now is if I do that directory listing now. Oh, sorry. Really? Well, let's make a new terminal. Okay. Okay. Okay, the demo gods are not being kind to me today. Because I don't see the... that one profile did not make it yet. So, what you will see there is you will the direct. Literally, you see the directory start showing up, and you can go straight through it. I can show you the other one. So I can show you the observe control screen. If I try to do an observe screen, it'll actually it won't prompt me for that permission. If I try to issue a kickstart command, it will let me do that. So, so that's the one profile that didn't make it. Let me just double check that we actually did send it. Hold on. Any questions while I try to tweak that terminal demo, because I was really excited about that one. Box, yeah, for them. Yeah, all profiles are sent out via APNS, all App Store apps. If we can deliver it over the APNS channel, we do that. Prior to, if a machine is not enrolled in MDM, that's a Mac, we deliver it over the agent. But you have to, with 10.14, that changes too now because profiles have to really kind of go through that channel. You have a question?
Yeah, just on a sideline, that agent, what kind of protocol are you internally using, like for transferring file sets and such?
Oh, yeah. So with FileWave, it's a proprietary protocol that we have that uses. We've documented all the ports, but it's like it's like under 2443 and a couple. Well, there's a couple different ports they run on, but essentially it's a proprietary protocol. But basically, you just I actually asked one of the developers one time. They explained it to me, but I don't fully. I mean, you have to look at the packet level. Yeah. No, but someone that's explained to me is like, with the type of data we send back, and I'm not an expert on that, but it's TC. It's just regular.
It's reliable.
Oh yeah. And it's all encrypted too, so it's. If people are running off-site, if people are, you don't have to worry about and again, we're now encrypted end-to-end, so caching, clients, server, boosters, imaging appliance, everything is encrypted. So with your certificates, which is why I tell everyone, don't use you can use a self-signed cert, but you're making your life a lot more difficult. So spend the $10 or more, preferably better certs for more money, and you'll be better off. I'll try one more time, but it does truly work. But what you see is if I remove that profile, all of a sudden I'm not permitted again, because terminal has now lost that ability. Any other questions, or I got one in the second row over there.
I have a command that sets the desktop background on imaging, and it's not working for me at the moment, and I think it's related to this. Does that make sense? It's using an OSA script, and if I run the command manually, it asks about
I kind of avoided
permission.
that topic, yeah. So scripting can get tricky because it's like if it's a Python script, do you need to give approval to all of Python or just to the script itself? Ideally, the script should be signed. So that's kind of was going to be, I kind of wanted to avoid that whole
Sorry.
part of it. Yes, no, this is, I mean, if you Google, you will find, you might want to think about, I think, can't you, through the MDM, I thought, we have a setting, I think, to actually set the desktop picture if you've delivered the, okay, this might be user error, hold on. I might not have actually assigned it to that Mac. Oh, error occurred while it's here. Okay, I got something weird going on with my, it thinks I associated, but I didn't. The US, oh yeah, the desktop. So I think there is an option as part of just the Apple definition to do a restrictions, right? Or did they put it under? You can lock the desktop picture, but I thought there was a policy to actually set it now to.
That's an iOS.
Oh, that's an iOS. Okay.
There is restrictions, and then you can put it
Mac restrictions. Yep. There we go here.
in case.
You can allow launch folders. Or is it? I thought it was in the section with the.
Best option is the search.
Yeah, of course. Come on. Probably just picture, right? I get scared because the beach file comes up for a second, but it doesn't goes away.
Check functionality.
Yeah. It's now gotta wait for it to finish searching.
I have an option here that says lock desktop picture.
Yeah, there's a lock, but I know on the iOS you absolutely can pick a picture, but I thought there's a place where you can actually set. Yeah, you can do it. Okay. Yes, functionality. Whoever called that, good call. I knew I saw it, but I couldn't remember where. So you can lock the desktop picture, and when you do that, you give it a path to the picture. So what I would do with FileWave is push out the picture, or if it's not on the machine. Oh, that's part of your image, so you take care of that. And then you could push out this policy through the MDM,
Yeah.
the MDM. To,
I don't necessarily want to prevent them from changing it if they want to. I just want to put.
no, does it let me do it without? Yeah, it looks like the only way to set the picture is to lock it.
Well, I'll futz around with.
Well, you could do too, depending what you're using for a tool. I mean, yeah, so you want a different image per. You want to start with the same initial image.
Yeah, I just want to have a
So
non-stop.
back in the glory days of Workgroup Manager, you could make it as a once preference. Dating myself there, but yeah, they simplified it a little bit. Yeah, but probably that's why you're scripting it the way you are. And if you want to, yeah, there was like another whole set of web pages just about like getting scripts to run with TCC and everything. But that probably is what's. I mean, with FileWave, I think we can launch scripts. I mean, it's an OSA script or just a regular like FileWave itself can launch scripts as part under its own umbrella. So if FileWave's been grandfathered, you could like have it launch like a bash or something script. But you're probably the OSA one's its own. And there are some examples out there that people that grant it to, but then you're granting all Apple scripts. It's a whole. It's an evolving area. That could be probably its own session somewhere. So. Yeah, another question. We got 2 minutes on the timer. Yep.
It's not a question, it's a comment that I've been using a profile creator by Eric Berglund. It's a GUI. He's still developing it. And once I got the hang of it, so you can make the TCC, and then depending upon what your MDM is, you can upload it. And
Absolutely.
so it doesn't matter whose product you're using. It's
If
quite
you have a cool
It's quite
profile,
slick.
you can
It's quite slick actually, and allows you to do via iOS or Mac OS, or even sometimes he makes a note that say, even though this says iOS only, it'll work for Mac OS and things like that.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
this is with our tool, but obviously we can import profiles that someone else. I mean, if I want to share it with you and you're using something else, I can export it just as a mobile config. You can use it. I can send you something I have. We just decided to put it into the GUI just to make it a little easier for our users. But yeah, absolutely.
We haven't upgraded yet to the latest version, so the functionality, the feature is not yet supported, and I asked FileWave support to make a custom profile, upload it, and it just works. So,
Yeah, the point he's making is like they are not at the latest version of FileWave yet, and obviously that editor's not in there. But either support or any way, if you can create a valid mobile config, we can import anything in. So even though that version may not support that feature, it's just a profile. As long as your clients understand it, you're good. Well, thank you very much. They just cut me off, and we're good.